Welcome everybody. This is Dave Salter with ProShip, and I'm joined by Heather to do our presentation on sustainability today. And why don't we start off? Heather, would you like to do a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you. So my name is Heather Mathis. I am a consultant with a group called Start, Grow, Manage. Start, Grow, Manage is a boutique firm that helps people start, grow, and manage businesses. I'm also a member of the Wisconsin chapter of the Association for Supply Chain Management, which is why I'm here today. I have 3 supply chain certifications from ASCM, and I've also been an instructor for the Wisconsin chapter for about a decade now, and looking forward to continuing to be an instructor. One of the reasons why I'm here to talk to Dave today, as he well knows, is because I have an extensive background in supply chain, over 20 years of supply chain experience, the vast majority of that being at SC Johnson, the family company, also located and headquartered in Racine, Wisconsin. And we'll dig a little bit more into that when we're talking about some of the examples later on. But that's just a high level view of who I am and why I'm here to talk about sustainability.
And I am Dave Salter with ProShip. I'm in charge of business development here. And how I know Heather is actually I sit on the board for ASCM for the Milwaukee chapter, which is the Association of Supply Chain Management. And Heather's one of our great trainers that will help with certifications. And we're actually going to cover that a little bit later in the program and some of the things that we're doing here. But welcome everybody. And why don't we start just a little housekeeping piece of it. As Heather mentioned before, we will have the capability to ask some questions. If you want to download any of the downloads that we have for you and you want to do them as takeaways, we will also send those to you in an email a little bit later. You'll get one from me. But the takeaways from this is we want to be able to have you be able to have a conversation with others, have it with people in the company, and some of the things with it. So here we go, and why don't we start with our presentation here. Again, this is just a quick overview of what we're going to do today. And what we're really going to start with is just a big picture and talk about some of the things with it, about sustainability. And I'm really going to call upon Heather to give her knowledge of this, because she does have a great deal of knowledge and background within the supply chain industry. So feel free to ask questions if you've got something that pops up, and we will do a couple polling questions during this and going from there. So why don't we jump into this, Heather, and we'll go from here.
Sounds great.
Again, big picture. This is what we constantly talk about at ASCM meetings and within work. How do you keep growing your knowledge? Why don't you take us there, Heather, and tell us how you do a lot of the things that you're doing as far as background.
Well, that's a great place to start. And I can see here, you can see all of the news articles here, some from Forbes, some from other areas about, how to collect supply chain news. There are a few other supply chain newsletters that I follow that also provide news on a weekly basis. The Supply Chain Dive. And really what those newsletters do is, give you a focus on what's going on in the world of supply chain. So I think that, if you've subscribed to quite a few of these, they help keep you in abreast of what's going on in terms of sustainability.
And I think we talked about this when we were prepping for the discussion. We talked, how much time do we spend trying to bring us up to date, not just sustainability, hitting other websites. Why don't you describe how you kind of handle it in your day?
Yeah, I love to, just keep a handle on the news through, making sure that I am subscribed to supply chain newsletters from companies that specifically deal in supply chain. And normally those will come, once a week, unless something's really busy. Or going on hot in supply chain, then you might get a special news report. I probably spend an hour or two a week with the supply chain news. And of course, because I follow it on Google and on other internet browsers, I'm always getting feeds about supply chain in my social media as well. LinkedIn is another great resource. There are a lot of groups there. that relate to supply chain. And there's also groups that are there for the Association for Supply Chain Management, where people have created groups, and they'll also publish news there as well.
And I'll follow up with on LinkedIn. I think that's a great asset is to people that you follow in the podcast that they might be doing. And I know, speaking for our team at ProShip, we've got a great marketing team that puts out a lot of content. So it's always good to follow some of the favorite leaders out there in the industry and what you're doing. This is the one thing that we're constantly going to go back to in our discussion today of how everything comes together in that triple bottom line. Heather, why don't you just run us through this slide and how it really plays for a lot of the people in the industry today?
Sure. One of the foundations of sustainability when it comes from a supply chain standpoint is the triple bottom line. And what is the triple bottom line? It's really those three aspects that you see there on the chart. We call it people, planet, profits. The chart says finance, but if you hear me say profits, I just mean the finance section, right? So let's start in the finance section, because we all know that we're in business to make money, right? Businesses are around to make money. And if they're too focused on other things and not making a profit, then they don't have economic longevity or economic stability, right? So that's really going to be a crucial aspect of the triple bottom line. The other aspects, I'll go over to planet next, right, is the environment. So we have to look at how are we treating the ozone? What are we doing in terms of making sure we don't pollute the water? How are we doing things to reduce our carbon footprint, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on in terms of examples. But those are things that would relate to the environment and to the planet, and making sure that we're looking at the planet while we're making our business decisions. The third aspect is the people. And it's not just the people who are the employees of the company, but it's also the people in the community, any other kind of stakeholders. If it's a publicly traded company, it's the shareholders, it might be people on the board, it's anyone who has a vested interest in that company's success and the impact that that company is making on the environment. So not only does that company have responsibilities as it relates to making more money, but they also are going to have responsibilities as it relates to their employees, their stakeholders, and to the planet and the environment as well. And when you put all three of those together and they're able to do all three successfully, then you hit that sweet spot right there in the middle, that red area. And that's what we're calling the triple bottom line. And we're looking for companies that are pursuing sustainability to be operating in that sweet spot.
And over the last few years, I think there's been a big push that companies that do sustainability programs really market it. How do you see that within supply chain, almost driving business from the consumer standpoint, like in SC Johnson? How did they go about things with that?
Well, I can give a couple of examples from my time at SC Johnson, especially as it related to Planet. One of the things that attracted me there in the first place was that they were very conscious of the environment. And they also, as the family company, right, tried to take great care of their people. And one of the projects that I worked on when I was at SC Johnson was specifically regarding carbon footprint. I was in the transportation department, and we were charged with reducing the amount of trucks that we put on the road. One of the ways that we were able to do this is to work with the people who were loading the trucks. I worked at the manufacturing facility that they call Waxdale, which makes Windex and a lot of their other products. And we were able to come up with ways to more efficiently load the trucks, which then saved us a few hundred trucks a year. So by taking a few hundred trucks a year off the road, we were able to reduce the carbon footprint as it related to the amount of emissions and things that were going to be on the road.
And I know from a ProShip standpoint, we're constantly asked of how can we save a company money, and in the shipping side of parcel, it comes down to what can you fit in a box. So the same thing you're talking about in truckloads, we're asked constantly, where can we save money? putting the right size box with the product that's going out, or using automation maybe for bagger machines and things along that line. And I bring that up because later today we'll actually cover a little bit about automation and how there's savings in it for you, not just from a labor but shipping standpoint. I think that's one of the things that you've seen, Heather, in the field, automation even on how they pack that box. And SC Johnson has gone as far as changing the shape of containers and what fits in the box. I mean, it's little things that happen that actually help that triple bottom line that you're talking about, correct?
Yes, every little bit helps. Companies like P&G, SC Johnson, Clorox, and consumer products, you guys have probably noticed lately, not later, that they're starting to ship products and allowing you to add the water, right? So by doing that, they're reducing the size of the package, and by reducing the size of the package, obviously you can ship more, and by shipping more to the customer, then you can reduce the carbon footprint. And that's a new trend that we've seen in the last few years. They've been talking about it for a while, but now it's starting to be released, and I think it's being pretty well received by the consumers.
Exactly. So many things that they can do in the process to help with sustainability. How long ago did you first start working on a sustainability program?
Oh, wow. I started at SC Johnson back in 2003. I think they were obviously working on sustainability. I started my projects probably around the 2008, 2009 timeline, as it specifically related to transportation and logistics. But there's always been a focus there of sustainability. I mean, just as an example, while people are filling out the poll, SC Johnson, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the next slide, the waste pyramid, utilizes greenhouse gases, right, to help to maintain their plant. They were also one of the first companies that stopped using fluorocarbons in their aerosol cans. So they've always had a focus, but my specific beginning was around 2008.
And just to let you know, the polling question's not letting me put it up on the board here, but everybody has been asked to, of the polling result people, everybody's been asked to do one of those. It's not a surprising answer for what we're looking at. But why don't we jump right into what you mentioned here with the supply chain, with the pyramid. It's interesting because you talk about implementing programs. It's a pretty basic process to start with, but it's how you refine and you go from there. Can you walk us through the pyramid and some of the things with that?
Absolutely. So the waste pyramid is one of the things that we talk about within the Association for Supply Chain Management, and one of several of the courses as it relates to sustainability. And what we try to do is to impact the environment in several different ways. You can see here from the pyramid, it's kind of flipped upside down, right? It's a triangle that is flipped on its nose. The least sustainable or the worst thing for the environment is at the bottom, and the most sustainable and the most desirable thing for the environment is on the top. So we'll start at the bottom, right? Disposal, and we do that every day. We all have garbage cans. We throw something away. We know it ends up in a landfill somewhere, and that landfill maybe has things that are good or not good for the environment, right? So simply, disposal is the least sustainable of all of the waste, right? Then we go to recover. And that goes back to the example that I was giving about SC Johnson and the greenhouse gases. Are there things that we can recover and reuse perhaps in some different capacity? So when SC Johnson uses greenhouse gases and helps to power the facility, even though something's been disposed of, we're able to recover that energy and use it for another thing that will help to benefit the environment. Then we have recycle, and I know everyone's familiar with recycle. You know, we see the blue bins everywhere. You see them at the airport. You probably have them in your office where we put our empty plastic water bottles or our paper. And then we get the opportunity to buy things that are made from 100% recycled paper or a 100% recycled bottle. So that would be recycle, right? Reuse, and that would be more of, if we're using the water example, it actually had one, a water bottle that we can reuse, where we can refill water over and over again. And that way that we get a lot of uses out of the product before we actually have to dispose it. From a manufacturing example, when we talk about reuse, a lot of suppliers are now providing collapsible containers. So they'll send their product in a collapsible container. Then when you're done with the container, you flatten it down, you send it back, and then they refill those containers. So that's another great way of the reuse happening as it relates to manufacturing. Then we move into reduce. Reduce is more like not using as much of the item in a particular manufacturing process. So if we look at the plastic bottle, the plastic water bottle, when plastic bottles came out, they used a certain amount of plastic. And then when people were looking at becoming more green, you would see the advertisements that says, this water bottle uses 15% less plastic, right? So they figured out a way in their manufacturing process to be able to use less, to reduce the amount of that harmful material that they were using, but still provide the consumer with the same experience. And then the best of all is avoid. So if you're creating a product or if you're selling a product and it uses something that is chemically harmful to the environment, can we find a way of not using it at all? Similar to the carbon fluorocarbons example I gave about SC Johnson, is there something that we can replace, substitute, that is more friendly to the environment, but still gives that consumer the same experience? So those are the items that are on the waste pyramid. And when we're looking at manufacturing or we're looking at providing a service, we always want to look at how our items can be recovered, recycled, reduced, reused, or avoided, right? So we don't necessarily have to have us or the consumer dispose of them.
Those are great points. The pyramid's an easy thing to sit there and reevaluate what you're doing with projects. Over the years, we've seen similar things to the pyramid with it, but it seems like it's been really cut down to make it more basic and some of the things with it. It seems like within the field of shipping right now, we're seeing automation helping with some of that, building a box to a specific size, things along those lines. Avoiding, it's as simple as avoiding airspace in a package and some of the things with it and going from there. And I think especially in this e-commerce world today, we're seeing a lot of things with that. If you had to go back to the pyramid, is there one thing that you think is the hardest to work with in that pyramid, or it's just all one big cycle?
Well, I think you have to pick and choose, depending on where you are in your sustainability journey. But I'm going to say the hardest is going to be avoid, especially if you've been in business for a while and you know how to make things. We haven't yet learned how to avoid, although we're getting there, putting oil in a car that runs on gasoline, right? So we might be able to reduce the amount of time that we need to go for oil changes. We use synthetic oil to help do that. Synthetic oil better for, perhaps a reuse or has the ability to be reused or recycled. So we can use those types of things to help. But I think the hardest one of all is to avoid.
And it seems like you brought up the fact, it seems like everybody's done a program and now you have to come back and reevaluate them. How do you see the industry today having to do it once, come back, relook at it again? Is that something common? Is that something that is challenging companies even more?
Absolutely. It's all about continuous improvement, right? So just because you look at the pyramid once and you tweak the way that you do things doesn't mean that 5 years from now, or even 2 or 3 years from now, there aren't new technologies that come out or new ways of doing things that can help you to be even more sustainable as it relates to the environment. We know things are changing at a historically quick rate now, with technology. So as we continue to move forward, there are things that are being put in place that help us to treat the environment better. So as we get those things and as they're introduced into the marketplace, it gives us the opportunity to revisit the triangle and see where we can impact things.
And I think that takes us right into our next subject here that we have, and we're talking about for what we want to do here. Let me get to the next slide, make it a little bit easier. Here you go. It's right here, reducing the fossil fuel and the ways we're going about it. And it seems like one of the questions we got asked first is, how do we handle the carbon emission credits, things along those lines? Do you mind walking us through some of the things here that we're seeing that you're working with, or the companies you've worked with have been doing, and going from there?
Yeah, and green energy is huge now. In manufacturing, you see it now as, and I know I drive to see my sister downstate Illinois, and what do we drive by? A ton of windmills, right? SC Johnson has the wind power. You see that people are using that as a way of doing green energy. We also have solar energy, where we're having solar panels placed to be able to use those as power versus using the power from off of the electric grid. We can see now that we have vehicles and lots of laws that are now waiting to be passed about moving towards having completely electric or non-gas running vehicles in certain states. I think California was the first one to introduce that, but now there are several other states following suit, some on the East Coast, some on the West Coast, where they're actually looking within the next 10 to 15 years to start to put bans on having vehicles that consume gasoline. So that's another way that we're moving towards green. Like you mentioned, automation. So I know Amazon has a big push right now towards automation. They're looking at the pickers and the people who currently prepare their orders, and they have they're working to create robots that can do that, right? And what does that do? When you have robots that are operating versus people, you don't need heat. You don't need to have the lights on. You also don't need as much space for people to be able to move around. So automation can also help with green, because it will allow you to save on those items as well.
And I think that's a great point. We're going to go back to automation again and again and again. And it's, how do you take those technologies that are out there, constantly changing technologies, and make it work better for you? I know there's no crystal ball to the future and some of the things we're looking at, but what's the biggest area you see growth? You mentioned robotics, pickers. Where are you seeing that people are asking you in the supply chain to look at?
In terms of this slide, I'm gonna say it's the vehicles, right? That's the biggest focus right now. Is moving not just towards the non-gas vehicles, but also, and I'm kind of slipping back to the last slide, the autonomous drivers, right? And those are the two big things that are happening right now, where millions and millions of dollars is being pushed into technology to focus on that. So that kind of touches the automation a little bit. And it also touches the green as well.
Well, that gets us up to the next polling question. And why don't we put it up there, Katie, and we'll go from there. So next polling question, it's really pretty simple about there. How are you finding education? Where are you getting the most knowledge and some of the things from there? Feel free to click on any or all of that apply to it. And Heather, we're going to go back to that same question again. Who's out there? Where are you getting that knowledge? And the one thing we're bringing up, and we're going to cover this in a little bit, associations and certifications, things along those lines. And we'll cover that in the next slide. But what do you really think in this whole process keeps you going and finding more knowledge and things out there?
Well, I'm just a supply chain geek, so I just love everything supply chain. I can talk about it all day. I love talking to people. And what I really love now is that post-COVID, before COVID, 1 out of 10 people knew what supply chain was. Now everybody knows what supply chain is, so we can always have a conversation about it. But the great thing is that it's something that impacts people's day-to-day lives. Oh, and I'll pause because you got the results from the poll.
That sounds good. Let's see if we can share those with us here. Katie, can you share that, or is that me that has to share that?
Oh, I can see it there right on the screen. It looks like 100% of people use websites and podcasts, which I do as well. About 38% use continuing education or certifications, and 38% have some type of membership to an association, CSCMP, ASCM, et cetera, et cetera.
And that'll move us on to the next slide here that we're talking about here, I think, and some of the things with it. Why don't you talk a little bit about education and certifications? And by the way, I'm going to go back to the fact Heather is one of our trainers that we have for Association of Supply Chain Management in Milwaukee here. We've got a group of really talented people that do it. Why don't you run through some of the things, at least for some of the organizations and things that you see out there right now?
Of course. CSCMP is also, and we saw that in the poll, another supply chain company that provides news and certifications. But of course, ours is the Association for Supply Chain Management. We're the favorite here. Where you can reach us, and you guys, again, will get all of these links. It's a global organization. People are certified all over the globe. We have local chapters. In this case, we have a greater Wisconsin chapter that covers the greater Wisconsin area. And of course, we have education and certification. So there are certificate programs if people just want to do something that teaches them a little bit about supply chain, or their certifications that they can get, the certification for production and inventory management, which is the CPIM, the certification for supply chain professionals, the CSCP, or the certification for logistics and transportation and distribution, and the CLTD. And you can see each one of those focuses on a different area, but it allows you to be, within a pretty elite group of individuals across the planet that carry a credential that says, I've done extra work to become more of an expert within supply chain. And some of the web resources, like you were asking me earlier, where are some of the places that I get my news? These are some of the links out to some of the newsletters that I follow, the Supply Chain Dive, the Supply Chain Brain, and then Supply Chain 24/7. So all of those resources have regular up-to-date news that you can get in your inbox, or you can just click the link to follow and get news. But what I really like about education, and I'm one that's a real proponent of always staying fresh, always continuing your education, is that even if you get a certification or even if you get a certificate, the Supply Chain Association for Supply Chain Management is also creating a knowledge base, and they're filling it with presentations, blogs, articles about all the most current things in supply chain. So having a membership with the Association for Supply Chain Management also gives you access to all of those things as well.
And I'll throw it out there, CSCMP, we just did the show last week down in Nashville. Great program. The presentations that are being put on at trade shows, continuing your education that way, there's a great way to keep continuing on and finding out more things. But let's go back to the education and certifications. Who do you see taking these classes? It's not just people directly related to supply chain, is it?
It's not, and you'd be surprised. And like I said, I've been doing this for about a decade now, and we've had marketing people take these classes, accounting people take these classes. Anybody who wants to learn more about supply chain management and how we do things in supply chain can benefit from these programs, and they may or may not want to go for the certification, but they'll always come out with more of an appreciation. You know, as a supply chain professional, I know, marketing has this view of us and we have this view of marketing. So it's really nice for us to be able to get together and them to learn more about supply chain and then go, oh, that's why you do this. Oh, that's why you do that. So it really opens up their eyes as to, why things happen the way they do in the supply chain.
And let's take that a little bit further along with certifications. I can speak of one recently. A good company in Wisconsin, Generac, just did a program where they brought multiple of their employees to do one at one time for the training. Are you seeing that as a trend where companies are bringing in and doing one certification? And is there one certification that you like more of the three that are mentioned right here?
So funny you should say that, Dave, because when I teach classes, I always tell them the answer to every supply chain question is it depends. So it depends. I have seen the whole gamut, right? I just finished up a class in Wisconsin teaching CPIM certification for a group in manufacturing. But if it is office professionals as it relates to supply chain, CSCP might be a better choice. So you really have to understand who the audience is. In-house is great because it gives them the opportunity to, bring people in during the workday and not have them to have to do it after hours. But you also have the benefit of sending someone to a local Wisconsin chapter class because then they get the chance to interact with people from other companies. So there's a benefit from being able to learn from the way other companies do business and getting examples through the conversation and dialogue. So I love the in-house. I think it's great. I think it gives you the chance to really provide your employees with some value. But again, the type of certification that I'd recommend would depend on the audience. Obviously, if it's people in transportation, we probably would, or warehousing, we probably would look at the CLTD and we would just go from there.
And just to throw out one thing, we keep mentioning the Wisconsin chapter because we're both tied to it. The national ASCM organization, you can go there and find these classes nationwide. You don't have to do them in Wisconsin. You can take them other spots, do it online, and go out and look and see what's out there. And you don't have to stick to one organization and going from there. And then one last thing that I do want to hit, and we don't have it on the list here, number of colleges, universities, two-year tech schools that are doing supply chain management programs. Are you seeing that take off in the last 10 years?
Well, I will say yes, yes, and yes. Traditionally, it was only a 4-year degree. In the last, I want to say 5 years, I've seen that change a lot. I actually got tapped by Gateway Community College in Kenosha and Racine to start up a supply chain program there. And most of the other technical colleges in Wisconsin are also having supply chain management classes start there as well. So we're definitely seeing a trend to that as it relates to supply chain. And Dave, I did notice that there are a couple of questions on the sheet. I know we're getting close to running out of time.
Yep.
So would it be all right if I pulled these questions that came during the live event? All right, so I see the first question that says, what's the from the lean waste pyramid, how is the lean waste pyramid maintained inside the warehouse? That's a really good question. I think from you get how it is maintained from a manufacturing side, but if you're in the warehouse, and I'm assuming you mean the warehouse of finished goods, then at that point, everything's been made. So your impact comes from the ability to make sure that trucks are loaded in a better manner, looking at technologies that would help in terms of perhaps reusing items within your warehouse, maybe airbags, things of that nature. Would they be reusable airbags? Looking at things that you use in your day to day that you could potentially recycle, reuse, or reduce in using as it relates to those types of materials. I think that's probably the most significant way that a warehouse could help with the lean waste pyramid.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on. There's two different areas you talk about: production side, the distribution side. They all have different ways to change it. And you see the two starting to work together now, making smaller packages so it can get out on the transportation side and doing it that way. That's a great point. How about one of the other questions that popped up here? I'm looking at one of them that popped in. It was asking about, is there a realistic way to lowering the carbon footprint? And they're asking specifically for the middle mile. So middle mile is that transportation, it's picked up. How do you get it from A to B? There's 3 steps: that first mile, the middle mile, and the last mile. In between there, how are you seeing that go to market? And I know from our standpoint how it's handled. Have you seen that middle mile being affected when you can't control the carbon footprint as easily?
Yeah, that's a real tough one because a lot of times you have control over, as in transportation, you don't have control over the middle mile, right? So it ideally, it's really going to be more of a, and I don't want to use the word pressure, but let me try and explain it like this. When groups of vendors get together and say to their supplier, we want ABC, the supplier typically will go and get ABC. So when groups of vendors push the supplier to lower the carbon footprint of the middle mile, then that vendor will work to lower the carbon footprint on the middle mile, because there's ways that they can do it, but it may cost them a little money up front, things of that nature. So it's just like with any other customer. When a customer deems something as important, then it becomes the priority of that supplier or that vendor.
And I agree. We're seeing a lot of movement within the parcel market with consolidators, people that are picking up things, getting them to that one point where they're taking it that middle mile and filling a full truckload instead of just that single pallets in a non-dedicated truck. So the industry that's out there, it's out there to enhance what's going on. And I think that's how it's being reduced for the carbon footprint and some of the things we're looking at. And going
Yeah, and I think if you have a good relationship with the vendor, just like a manufacturer might work with a supplier to improve processes, you can work with your vendor to improve their processes. So if they're open to it, then you can also work with them directly to give them suggestions as to how to lower the carbon footprint. As it relates to, maybe helping them better package things on trucks, maybe helping them work more towards having more fuel efficient equipment. But that has to be more of a partnership, right? Where we're looking at working together.
Absolutely. And we've got another question coming up here, but why don't we get to the last slide here that we really had for the next one coming up? And it's really, when you start looking at the programs and you're doing and evaluating, even though most people have had this whole point of we've done it already, it's that constantly redoing it. But it's starting a program. How do you look at starting one? And I guess I'll say tweak the question, not only start it, reevaluate. Why don't we do that?
Right. And I think if your company doesn't have a sustainability program And it's got to come from the top down. It's got to come from top management. It's got to be a part of their strategy. They've got to get behind it. If they don't get behind it, it's not going to be successful. Just like companies that have implemented lean and other types of technologies within the last few decades, it's really got to be a management strategy and a top-down approach. Obviously, to do these things, it costs money. To be able to do the research that it takes to move from electric power to wind power, to buy a machine that will, take the energy away. There's an upfront cost to that, and sometimes it's millions of dollars. So that's why it really has to come from the top down, because they have to be willing to make that investment in the beginning and know that they're going to get a return on investment on the back end. That's not going to just profit them from an environmental standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. So making sure that that happens, and then that constant communication with the team, making sure that you get that buy-in from the team from the very beginning, so that they realize that this is not just the flavor of the month, that it's really going to happen, and taking their suggestions and feedback as it relates to that.
So you brought up the point earlier when we were talking about continuous improvement. So taking this program, once you start it, how about the reevaluating and going from there?
I think it's all about making sure that you have a cadence, again, in your company of continuous improvement. As we know, just 15 years ago, we didn't have the level of technology. We didn't have smartphones. We didn't have the level of technology we have now. So you can't, it's not just a one and done. Every 5 to 10 years, strategically, to stay on top and to stay best in class, you have to reevaluate what's new, what's available, and see how it fits within your company's strategy, and then put, again, the time and the resources behind it to be able to continue to be best in class and move forward. I honestly don't think, and I think I'm moving into the takeaway slide, Dave, so hopefully I'm not moving too fast. It's really not optional. It's really not optional anymore. People expect, especially publicly traded companies, they expect you to have a sustainability program, and they expect you to report out on your 10Ks what you were doing to help benefit the environment. It's again about that people, planet, profit, right? How are you helping your stakeholders? How are you making money for the company, and how are you affecting the environment, right? And then the last takeaway as it relates to this is, companies that are really investing in this typically will have an environment of continuous learning, making sure that people have continuous education and keeping themselves knowledgeable, not just about supply chain, not just about sustainability, but about all of the things that impact their industry.
Yeah, and we're going to keep talking about this slide for a second, but I do want to go to the next slide we have here, just for the fact that we covered this before. If you've got a question, it's quick and easy to do, to type in a question for us. We want to make sure we get to it by the end of our discussion here. But feel free to ask a question and going from there, because I think the best ones are when we get the best podcasts are the ones where we get that great question. In fact, they normally lead to our next podcast from what we're talking about and going from there. So feel free to ask a question, but I do just want to go back to this last slide that we were talking about. One of the things you mentioned earlier about continuous learning, getting buy-in from the top, and it comes top down. Why don't we reverse that question? Do you see things bubble up from employees, for people that are on the lines, that they're involved in the process and pushing it up the other way? Can you cover that a little bit?
I'm going to say, if employees have more ability to push things up the line than they did before, but if it's not a part of the company strategy, it doesn't have that stick-to-itiveness. It doesn't, I know that's not a real word, but it doesn't have the ability to stick. If it comes, on the other hand, perhaps from a shareholder, right? If groups of shareholders get together, because the company really has to answer to their shareholders, because they're the owners of the company. Again, the top down, right? And they say, what are you doing in the face of sustainability, then it has a lot more traction. I think once upper management gets behind it, then the feedback from the employees is really going to be critical to the success of the program. But in terms of starting the program, it really has to come from the top down.
And I think you're right on that. It's buy-in, when it's at the top, it seems like things happen much faster, quicker to approve budget, quicker to make things happen, going from there. Again, I'm going to go back to the question button because we did have one question here. It said, MSC, world's largest shipping line, has announced a new air cargo service to address market demand. What's your input on that? And I know we talked about sustainability, some of the things with it. How do you see that playing into the market? People that are now doing a lot of different things with supply chain issues.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask that, and then I'm going to ask it for a green footprint or the footprint on that.
Well, air cargo is definitely not going to help with the green footprint, but but I think it's smart. As we all know, shipping is ocean liners are the slowest form of transportation, and air is the fastest. And with a lot of the slowdowns and the congestion that has happened at the ports, introducing air cargo is a great strategic way to present themselves and give themselves new opportunities in the market. I'm not as familiar with all the things that MSC does, but my assumption is that in the past, if someone needed something air freighted, they were doing it with someone else and not MSC, and they were like, hey, why can't we get that money? And now that more and more things are being air freighted, it gives them an opportunity to really get into the market if they have the resources, and then keep things in-house. And not to divert from the question, but kind of add to, even when you think about Amazon and how they're introducing drones, it's a new form of transportation. We've been delivering things with trucks, and they've been working for about the last 7 or 8 years to get permission to start using drones for delivery. I think they finally got permission to start to trial it, and so we're going to see that get introduced into the market. So you really, as a transportation company, I think it's smart for them to diversify into air cargo. That means they're giving less of the money away. If it's not able to go onto a ship, now they can say, well, if you do need to air freight it, you can air freight it with us.
And I think that's a great point when you always talk about diversifying how you can get things out into the market, being open to the different ways and going from there. One last takeaway before we get to our last slide here. Is there anything else you want to add as far as supply chain? I constantly am going to go back to that same thing. Knowledge is the key to everything we're talking about here. We'll send everything out from the slides. Start doing some great, listen to podcasts, listen to any of the websites that you're doing and follow those. Anything, Heather, that you can add to that?
I would just say, if you're using LinkedIn, get involved in some groups, stay connected. The Association for Supply Chain Management, no matter where you are, if there's a local chapter nearby, we'll have both in-person and virtual events. So get involved that way as well. And attend conferences. I know both CSCMP and the Association for Supply Chain Management both recently had conferences. That's a great way to network. Don't just stick to people within your organization. Network with other people in other industries within your same industry, and use that knowledge to help improve your own supply chain organization.
And I can't agree with you more about being involved, networking, taking advantage of the other people out there that learn from their mistake, learn from their knowledge, learn from their successes, everything that's out there. I think that's something we constantly do. As we're putting up a few contact information things on the slide here, again, mention the company you had here that you're doing, and give us a little knowledge of what you guys do, particularly as a company.
Oh, our company is Start Grow Manage. Again, we're a consulting firm, and we work with smaller companies. So somewhere around the range of $500,000 to $5 million um, uh, gross revenue. And we help people to start, grow, and manage their businesses. I'm the supply chain expert. We have a marketing expert, a sales expert, and a technology expert. So we basically have taken all of our experience. You see the gray hair here. We're all seasoned professionals, and we work with businesses to help to grow them to that next income threshold. And we've also included a download from us as a thank you for allowing me to attend this event on behalf of the Wisconsin chapter of the Association for Supply Chain Management, just to kind of introduce the group to some marketing info.
And that's great. And I'll follow up with the ASCM. Again, Wisconsin chapter has been doing a lot of things to help businesses, to network, student organizations on campus and doing things along those lines. And again, certifications and things that run with it. Not just ours, but check out the National Association with that, CSCMP, and going from there. There also are information here from ProShip. So again, Heather, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I think it's been a great conversation. Heather, anything else?
No, but thank you so much for having me. I hope some people got a little bit about sustainability out of this, and they're able to incorporate it into their organizations wherever it is that they work. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, Dave and ProShip, thank you so much for having me on behalf of the Association for Supply Chain Management and Start Grow Manage. We say thank you.
I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks so much for coming. Appreciate it now. Bye-bye.